All right, hello everyone. Welcome. I can see a lot of you are already ahead of the game and have went ahead and joined our Menti poll. We're going to be using some Menti slides for the duration of our session today. So there's a number of ways that you can join. You can use the code at the top of the screen if you're used to logging into Menti that way. We have a QR code on the screen that you can scan. It is kind of convenient to do this from your mobile device. You don't necessarily have to be on a computer if you want it to be separate from your video and all that. And also, Hannah's just sent the direct link in the chat.
So we'll give a few moments to let everyone get a chance to get into Menti and join us. I also have Menti up on my screen, so if you are having some difficulty but still want to participate in some of our awesome interactives, I will be looking at the chat and putting some of those comments in just to help make sure that everything is in one place.
Yes, thank you, Hannah, for doing that for us. And this is the Differentiated Instruction in Scratch workshop, and we appreciate you all being here with us today. And notice that our numbers are climbing. We'll probably wait another maybe 30 seconds before we get started.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. Yay. That's a lot of people in the Menti. This will be exciting.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, feel free to test out some of the sort of like options that are on the opening slide. You will be able to interact in a lot of different ways in these slides today. So
I love the cat button.
I'll make sure it works.
And we'll definitely go over some of those features as well as we get into our presentation and our workshop so that we're all on the same page with how to use it. Yeah. Yes, spamming the cat button. Love it.
Yeah. I don't know what the cat button is for, but I'm not complaining. All right, we ready to go?
I think we're ready to go.
Amazing. All right, so to get us started on our presentation and workshop today, we wanted to just do a quick little check-in to see how you're feeling on the scale of pop culture teachers. So this is a little bit like a pin on a map. You should be able to place a dot on where you're feeling. I think we would get very different responses if this were not during the summer. Also, shout out to whoever immediately put the pin on Snape. You are very brave. Thank you for sharing.
If you're having some trouble with the pins, you can also do it via emoji or describe the emoji in the chat. Whatever is going to work best for you. I see a couple of people stuck them on the emojis, so I think we have some people who are feeling Yoda and some people who are feeling Alien. Works for me.
Yeah. I feel like as a music teacher, I'm always School of Rock by default.
I mean, we all know where I stand.
Yes.
and if you can't guess, we'll figure that one out as we go. But we got 2 on Snape. Impressive.
Yeah, so looking in the chat. Hello. Yeah, and again, if it's not working for you, feel free to drop your sort of approximate response in the chat if you're not on the Menti yet, and it should allow you to join at any time. So if you get knocked out of the Menti for some reason, you can rejoin us.
This is looking pretty awesome, though. We've got a fairly balanced towards some of these really very different types of teachers and feelings today. So I'm really excited.
It looks like
coding is the dark arts. Love it.
It looks like we are hiring Miss Frizzle and Yoda. They're our top 2 candidates for our imaginary classroom.
All right.
I forgot the teacher from Abbott Elementary, but
oh gosh, I remember the actress's name, but not the character's name.
Oh no. All right, I think we're gonna move on to our next slide. Thank you all for sharing. This does pertain to some of the strategies that we'll discuss a little later in our session. So here we go.
All right, friends, so just to orient us and get us ready to really know what we're doing in this workshop today, we've got a quick kind of syllabus. I forgot the word that I'm looking for. Timeline?
Outline?
Outline. Outline's a good word. Oh, it's at the top of the slide. Well, we'll talk about that too. A quick outline just to share what we're doing. We're going to start with this introduction, which you are all doing amazing with. Ooh, Janine. I'm so glad everyone shared that one. Thank you. We're going to start with a quick introduction, which we're in the middle of. We're going to then go into our Scratch project. From our Scratch project, we're going to go over some learner profiles, and we will explain a little bit more what those profiles are when we get to them. After our learner profiles, we will discuss strategies more in depth. and then we will conclude. So we'll do a quick conclusion and a Q&A.
And speaking of the Q&A, so one of the cool features of Menti and why we chose to use this for presentation is we have a Q&A parking lot. So if you have some in-depth questions that you'd like to ask us or pose to all of our attendees towards the end of our Q&A, you can park them in the Q&A slide at the end by just scrolling up on whatever device you're using to log into Menti. And it should have a little section where you can type a question and it'll all appear at the end. So if you have any long form questions that really don't fit in with what we're doing at that exact moment, you can park them there. We'll see them at the end of the presentation.
And you can always stick those questions in chat as well, because I'll make sure that we're getting them in. So just to kind of give an introduction to ourselves, my name is Hannah Weiss. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a STEM communicator and informal or non-formal, depending upon what you call it, educator and innovator. I am a total geek, and I aspire to be Miss Frizzle.
All right, and I'm Leilani Dade, also she, her pronouns. I'm a doctoral candidate in musicology at the University of California, Riverside. I consider myself a STEAM educator because I do a lot of STEM and arts curriculum. And right now I work as a music, art history, and code teacher at a school for students with learning differences. And I'm a Minecraft game coach.
So another really important thing to know about me is that in addition to all of this, I am dyslexic. So when I come into doing differentiated instructions, especially looking at Scratch, that is a lens through which I view it, making sure that everyone can participate.
Yes, and similarly for me, I was, when we made this presentation, in the process of getting screened for ADHD. I actually received my diagnosis yesterday. So that's where I'm coming from, the sort of creative ADHD kind of side of things. And both of us are
gifted. We went through school with that fun gifted tag, which as you're talking about differentiation and accommodations, words we're going to talk about, that tag is also one that you sort of really need to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So when we say differentiated instruction, differentiated instruction, what are we talking about? So differentiated instruction is really just all about adapting to meet the needs of learners with learning differences. We can differentiate through content, through process, product, and we'll do it according to student readiness, interest, and learning profile. So what is a learning difference? We're using learning difference in this case as a catch-all term to refer to any learning needs that might require using differentiation strategies. So it refers to dyslexia, like we talked about, ADHD, like we talked about, also those gifted learners, but could also mean students with hearing differences, behavioral challenges, and even different linguistic backgrounds, ELL students.
All right, so to get our conversation going, because this is a workshop, we would love to hear from you about what specific learning needs that you encounter most frequently. We know that a lot of you are coming from a variety of different backgrounds. Some of you are working in a traditional sort of school setting. Some are doing homeschool. Some are coaches. So we just want to hear just across the board the kinds of learning needs that you encounter in the environment where you plan to implement Scratch program.
And I'm seeing some in the chat. So as we see them in the chat, I will make sure to get them in there. There may be some creative spelling. Ooh. Shout out to dyslexia.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm glad that there's one about low self-esteem. That's definitely a sort of a social emotional need that maybe doesn't get as much attention. Yes.
Oh my goodness, Leilani, I can copy and paste from the chat.
Yeah.
This is mind-blowing.
For sure. Yes, we're seeing a lot of repeating patterns here, which is good.
Oh, I really love bringing up also different socioeconomic statuses, because that is definitely something that really does change how students and learners do in learning situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we also see one about engagement, and Scratch is one of those things that can boost engagement. We'll talk about how to do it, and hopefully hear some fun strategies from you all as well. Okay, we'll wait here maybe 30 more seconds. What do you think? Minute?
I think 30 seconds is probably good.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of responses.
I'm seeing a lot of patterns show up, though. I'm seeing a lot of, autism, ADHD, specific learning disabilities.
Screen distraction.
Well, definitely.
Yep.
I'm seeing a lot of like, we see all of these things everywhere and
Yeah.
insecurities. And these are definitely things that really do affect how learners are able to interact with content.
Yes. If you have anything else you'd like to add, be sure to park it in the Q&A for us. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, so our next question for you all, and this is more of a brainstorming question. So if you don't want to share with us on the Menti, maybe try to just jot this down in your notes or just think about it in your head. But what accommodations can or do you provide in your learning environment? And it's helpful to think of this question separately sometimes from the students that you have. And we'll talk about the process in just a moment. But thinking about the accommodations that you can provide is sort of like coming up with an emergency plan for your classroom. So the moment that a student with a certain learning need comes in, you already have a plan in place versus reacting to the students that you know you already have. That sort of thing. So yes, we're getting some good ones in here. Wait time, frequent breaks, offering choice.
And I will say also, this is about what we can provide, not what you would ideally provide. I know as an informal educator, I would love to provide flexible seating. And the reality of the situation is just, that's not always something I can do.
Sometimes you don't even know if you're going to have seats. It's kind of a toss-up sometimes. Yes, kinesthetic activities for sure.
I'll also point out, if you were on the previous slide and still had your cursor in it, you may have to select go to slide at the very top of Menti.
True. Yes. Good. Thanks for pointing that out. All right. These are looking good so far. Let's head on to our next slide. Here we go.
So the reason that we want to go through both what we see and what we are able to do is that oftentimes you may have a really, really fantastic strategy in mind, a really wonderful lesson, and something changes and you are accommodating on the fly. So some really key things to keep in mind when you are doing that accommodation on the fly is, how much time do you have? Is this a 45-minute lesson? Do you have 10 minutes to prepare? Do you know your students already? It's not always true as an informal educator. How are your students doing that day? So we started our entire presentation off just by gauging the mood of the room.
Mm-hmm.
What information do you have about them, and what are their interests?
All right, so we'll go through a couple useful strategies for gathering some of this information with warm-ups and temperature checks. And again, just to point out, Hannah and I both come from an informal environment where we would have a almost randomized selection of students every day. And so this was really useful for just getting a feel for the room. And you're never going to get all the information at once, but it can help you when you go to make some judgment calls about how to set up your class. So here's one strategy that I like, is a very simple sort of would you rather or this or that type question, and you can test it out here. One that I like to do very often is, would you rather explore oceans or explore space? And I love this question because they're very similar, but they have some very key differences. And, you know, having the chance for students to express some strong opinions in kind of a training exercise before they get to the code, where sometimes expressing very strong opinions can cause conflict. This is a good kind of warm up to see where they're at with debate. And I usually try. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it also lets students kind of get that warm up to having an opinion and knowing it's okay to have an opinion about something that's kind of silly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's fascinating how close to 50-50 split we're at right now. Sorry, go ahead.
This is also a really great, like, I know that I am someone who definitely explores space. That's where I want to be. Grew up on the ocean, not what I want to be doing right now. And Leilani, I know that you were, when we were getting ready for this, you were getting ready for the ocean. So it can be a good way to know also how you might want to group students together. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if they're in the same space, that's where they want to be.
Yes. And also anecdotally, the theme of the warm-up question does tend to sort of percolate into the projects. So choose carefully. Next one. So this would not be a good idea for maybe elementary school students just because this is a very spooky theme, but we did this for y'all. We did this for you guys. So here's another style warm-up, and of course in an in-person classroom. This could look like a much more animated sort of discussion. Of course, we're in a virtual environment, but I would love for you to choose your favorite out of these fictional entities. Zombies, werewolves. Ooh.
Whoa.
Whoa.
This can also be like a really, really great, I'm seeing some, it might be fine for elementary. I'm also seeing this is a really great movement break one because you can split it up into 4 and go into corners of the room and have a really great debate that way. So in a virtual setting, you can do it, and in a physical setting, you can do it. I did not expect dragons to be at the very top.
I think we also suggested it with the image. Also, because Scratch involves creation of sprites and getting the kids sort of brainstorming about, I say kids, it could be adult learners as well, but getting them brainstorming about what sort of sprites or entities that they like may be helpful when they choose things like the protagonist or the villain in the game. They don't always have to have a game, but a lot of times platformer style does. Nice.
This also could be a great way to put some voice and choice in choosing the project that you're doing as a class and as a group.
Yes. Or if it's in smaller groups as well. So let's go to our next one. Okay, this is more of a content check. Of course, we haven't covered a lot of content yet, so just test this out and see how it goes. But it's always good to do these little periodic check-ins to see if they're doing great, okay, or I need help. This one is anonymous, which can be helpful if you need just a general feedback. I use Google Forms a lot for my students if they need to forward me any concerns so that I know who it is, but they don't necessarily know who's giving what feedback. And it can be nice to do this survey with a certain degree of anonymity so that they feel a bit more free to express themselves. Yeah.
This also can be a great ticket into the door. I've seen teachers do this during lessons where they have different cards on the desk. We did also have a question in the chat. What website were we using for this? We're using Mentimeter. Mentimeter is a great resource for doing virtual learning, which I know Leilani can talk a little bit more about. Yes. I did drop the link in the chat again if we had anybody who joined late and wants to kind of get on board.
Yes, and if you have questions about how to use Mentimeter in your classes, feel free to put that in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to talk more about the sort of the pros and cons at the end. All right, let's move along.
So we have gotten a great chance to go over some wonderful kind of warm-up strategies and getting us ready strategies. We have some kind of quick, and I use like quick and dirty as a term for strategies that we use. So when you're thinking about reading difficulties very broadly, you can enable high contrast in settings. I've seen that we have a friend from our organizer who's put in some an update about the accessibility features that Scratch has. High contrast is one of those really fantastic features. You'll see in a little bit, we have some code that we're going to show you. It might look a little different because a lot of it was taken from my Scratch account, and I use high contrast. You can pair students, emphasize block colors and shapes, and provide tactile tools, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. When you're thinking about math difficulties, a really great place to start is wondering or asking yourself how much math is actually included in the learning goal. Mm-hmm. Is my learning goal that the students are using this math, or is it that they're learning coding and programmatic thinking? Also providing physical representations of numbers and shapes, and again, pairing students. Then we get to emotional regulation, which is something that I know I am personally seeing a lot. Mm-hmm. And with emotional regulation, a great strategy is using visual timers to represent time until breaks. Dividing a project into smaller chunks and celebrating milestones. And of course, those breaks are really important.
Yeah, and just to build off of emotional regulation, the problem that I encounter a lot is frustration. And if there are students that are easily frustrated in general, when they encounter problems in the code, that's a big point of friction for the project and for them achieving the learning goals. So the having a clearly defined break, and also within Scratch, the fact that they have the creative tools that you can just go, draw the backdrop for a while or something is kind of a built-in potential for a brain break. But it can be really important. As far as focus difficulties goes, again, with the visual timers, it's very, very helpful for that. Fidgets. I know fidgets can sometimes be a controversial thing in classrooms. Some people love them. Some people, find that they're distracting, but they can be helpful. Physical breaks, as far as getting up and moving away from wherever the device is really important. And providing some tactile tools to support learning. We're going to give you some examples in just a second on that. For social difficulties, this is one that can be adjacent to emotional regulation, but can also look a little different depending on your students. So if you sense that the student might have some social difficulties, when they do pair coding or small groups, it is helpful to set up some really specific and defined roles, because all the students will probably struggle with setting that up on their own anyway. But a student with social difficulties may encounter unnecessary friction. So the idea here is not to remove all the challenges for them, but to remove any unnecessary obstacles that might get in the way of them getting to the challenge that you want them to undertake. And also providing them with a little bit of a prompt to get the discussion going, like an outline for what they should do right when they first meet with their group, can help guide the conversation as well.
So I saw 2 really great comments in chat that I just want to call out, because it's really fantastic to say these things verbally as well as have them written. We had someone say that they really liked these strategies because there is a misconception that accommodations take a lot of time and resources, and that definitely is a misconception that exists out there. A lot of accommodations and changes you can make will make a world of difference for one student and don't take you much time.
Yeah.
We had another person in chat shared that they have students that give themselves like little golf claps, which is great because it's a great way to celebrate that you've gotten something done and it's not super distracting. I also use sign language applause.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a house that signed, so ASL is something that ends up in a lot of my gestures. When we're talking about tactile tools, just to get ourselves back on track here, when we're talking about tactile tools, one of the best that we found is just physically printing out the blocks and laminating them, because kids are still kids. But it's a great way to allow people to move things around and experiment with things in a physical way, which can sometimes make it feel more real than coding can feel. It also is a really wonderful way to introduce new code. So if you're introducing a new block or a new, I don't know the word I mean, ability?
Yeah, sure.
a new ability. That's really, yes, I'm going to drop the link in chat. Absolutely. And I'm going to drop that link in chat right now. This is one of the best resources that I have found. So I use this site frequently for that. But there are other ones that exist out there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I want to point out that, some of these things do take time to cut out and laminate and set up. So all these accommodations, they are a little bit time consuming, like as was mentioned before, but I do find over time they save so much time as far as the fallout of not having them, or of, students losing their emotional regulation, things like that. So
we have a question in chat about would everyone get their own blocks, and I teach over 400 students. That is one of those things where teacher to teacher, it's going to vary. I know when I taught, I had a set of 3 or 4. Some students used them, some students didn't.
Yeah, and if you're doing it for that many students, part of the process could be them building them too. I don't put a child in charge of a giant laminator, but there are some other ways to do lamination and to set them up, and they can take part in that. That might save you some time as well. Let's talk about code buddies.
So we talked a little bit about pairing students and making sure that we have code buddies, but as you're choosing code buddies, someone dropped a link in chat to, I think, an official Scratch coding cards. That's awesome.
Yay.
Did not know those existed. It's really important to carefully choose who's going to match. The link, by the way, for the Scratch pieces at the you have to scroll down to get it. It's not where it looks like it is. It's right under the picture. You have to choose really carefully and make sure your students are matched for success. You can also really think about how students are going to be working together. They can collaboratively do a project, or they can do the project in parallel, 2 separate spaces working on a project but able to support. And also really making sure that there are clear roles for each partner.
For sure. All right. Hannah, would you like to tell us about our process?
Yeah, so we've gone through an awful lot of kind of the background for putting this process together. So we're going to talk now about what our process looks like. And we have it in a cycle because it very much is a cycle, something you work through. So step one is really just, what are the project elements? What is the project you're doing? What are the pieces they're learning? And what are the parts that go together?
Okay, so step two is identifying the student needs. So the student needs could be anything that we've mentioned before, also some things that might not have been our slides, but being able to identify that separate from the project elements is really helpful for step three.
It's really important to match those needs to the accommodation. So it really is a cycle that you go through. Start with project elements, identify your student needs, and then match those needs to accommodations that you can provide.
And this is in some ways the most important step. Oops, we're going backwards. Adapt and adjust. Adapt and adjust, because it's all well and good to think that this is going to work perfectly every time, but it's really not. You're probably only going to be able to identify a few students at a time. Some of the calls you're going to make aren't going to work. The students are going to come in a little differently from day to day. And so taking time to adapt and readjust and restart this cycle, going back to say, the project actually had a little bit more math than I anticipated. I didn't prepare blocks or anything for them to use, any tactile tools. So tomorrow or for the second half, I'm definitely going to go find those. And it helps to organize in your mind these 4 steps, because sometimes it can feel like a pasta of just a ton of tasks to have to do and rush before the learning experience starts. I'm going to let you have this one, Hannah.
I gotcha. As always, just like a really famous bus driving teacher said, take chances, make mistakes, and get messy.
Yeah, we like this show about transportation.
And fantasy.
Yes.
All right, friends. So from here, we're going to have a chance to do some code. We have picked out a project that we would love us to get a chance to explore together. You can check out, Tinkercad. Tinkercad's really fun too. You can check out that code by following the QR codes that we have above, or I've dropped the links in the chat. We have 2 options here. Oftentimes a great way to provide some differentiation strategies is to provide a lot of options. So you can play around with the completed code if you'd like, or with the starter code and put it together.
Yes, and also we did 2 extremes because we figured for you all, you probably would want to either assemble it yourself or just look at the completed code and customize it a little bit. For your students, there might be a third option. You might have, level 1, 2, and 3, A, B, and C, partial completion, sending out completed code for students who added to the class late or just got there and are missing some of the early things that were necessary to do the lesson is a great way to keep them included. So this is a strategy that you can implement for differentiation, having multiple copies of the same project, and just being conscientious about how you send out the links, because we all know if you send them all out to all the students, they'll sometimes pick the one you didn't intend for them to pick. So
we definitely had someone in chat also say it's called exploded code.
Yeah.
It can be. I have had using that term backfire, but it certainly can be called that.
Yes. All right, so those links are in the chat, and I think Hannah, if you want to tell us about one tool that you'll have to add if you're just starting a new project from scratch.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you are starting just kind of a new project from scratch, you just want to open it up and do it on your own, you do have to add the pen tool to do this code. So we have a screenshot up right now of where you're going to click. It's just that purple button in the bottom left corner.
Left, yes.
Yes, in the bottom left corner. And then at the time I took the screenshot, you're going to click on the second icon in the top row that says pen, and it's going to open back up.
I have no idea if these reorder or not, but it's there.
And then you can kind of put these codes together. This is one of the things that I tend to do when I am kind of teaching. I might even just leave this up if I want my students or learners to be able to grab the blocks on their own. You're going to take the on flag from the events. From pen, you're going to take set pen to and put pen down. From motion, you're going to take glide 3 seconds to X and Y. And if on edge, bounce. From looks, you're going to take hide. From control, you're going to take repeat. And from operators, you're going to take go to random 1 to 10 and go to random 1 to 10.
I think it's, yeah, this one is pick random.
Oh, pick random.
I know, it's a little pixelated on our screenshot.
And this is one of those you'll notice that.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No worries. You'll notice that the colors might be a little different than you're used to looking at, and the text is black instead of white. And that's because this is high contrast. Yeah, I just created those arrows in Google Slides really quickly.
And this is what the finished code will look like. So if you can, we're going to take 5 minutes for you to either put it together or explore the project. I'm going to start the timer now. And if you have any trouble accessing it for any reason, let us know. We're not going to tell you what it's going to do. It's a choice that you can make too, of course, whether you tell the students what the final goal is or just ask them to build it and kind of test it and see what happens. But we wanted to give you a chance to put it together yourselves because we're going to look at some student profiles or learner profiles and how to adapt this project for them. So take up to 5 minutes. We might not need the whole 5 minutes. We'll see.
But if you finish those 5 minutes, you can start to decide what else you can do with this same code. Or as you think through your students, if you were going to implement this project, what are some changes that you might need to make to be successful?
I see that there are some questions parked in the Q&A, which is nice. If you have a little time left over here, feel free to add your question. Wish we had some music. I was worried about loading music. I'll be honest, otherwise I normally would have music here. Music is a great thing to have in your classroom. Choosing your Spotify or whatever streaming service playlist is important. It's also definitely worth the pro to skip over the ads. Ads is like the most jarring thing in the middle of a project.
Yeah, although I know that we were definitely humming a certain theme song as we were putting this entire presentation together.
Oh yeah, so if we mention the theme song, then it just plays in everyone's heads and then we don't have to actually share the sound.
Oh, I am seeing in chat someone saying they are frustrated. And that is absolutely feedback that you might hear. So if you have a student that is feeling frustrated, one of the first things you might do is ask, what do you mean you're feeling frustrated? Can you tell me a little more about that? Or, I hear that you're frustrated. Can you tell me more about that feeling? Some of these blocks are unfamiliar. That is totally expected. So, our goal here is to discover what these blocks do. So it's okay that they're unfamiliar because we're learning together what we're doing with them.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, and also you can imagine too, our lesson today or our workshop today doesn't have all the context of an ongoing class that you might have. So they may have looked at half of these blocks already and the pick random might be new that day. We don't have the time and space within the workshop to create that entire curriculum, but we are looking at how to adapt specific projects. So if you want to take a break and maybe just take a look at some of our strategies in a second. It is not required for you to fully complete the project in order to participate in the workshop.
Yeah, right now, absolutely, Leilani. And I also am just going to respond really quickly to our chat. Right now, we're just connecting them. If you have students who maybe need a little bit more extension, because we did give you 5 whole minutes, of which we are halfway through, to connect them, you can change the numbers if you'd like. That was a great suggestion. You can also change the order and see if that changes. You can remove a block. You can choose to use different blocks. I'm seeing separating the blocks and clicking on sorry, I'm having trouble reading this. A trick I sometimes use is to separate the blocks and click on each of them to code each of them on the code area to see what they may do individually before adding together. And yeah, that is a great strategy as well.
Yeah, and it was kind of tough to pick the time limit for this too, because we know all of you are coming from different degrees of familiarity with Scratch. So we just tried to pick a ballpark amount of time to get started on the project. And remember, you can also click on the completed code and just manipulate the blocks that way. That is an option. And if you need Hannah to resend that link, we can resend it.
Oh, yeah, that is No worries. That is definitely a challenge. That's also why we picked a very short block set. So it was fun and interesting, included kind of a STEAM connection, but very separated.
Yes. 30 seconds. No, there's no pressure.
And friends, we'll let you know we're like pretty much exactly halfway through. So we do have a quick break coming up. So if you're still playing with those blocks, keep playing with them. Otherwise, we're going to give kind of a few minute like stretch break.
Yes, we got 10 seconds. I am not going to create an artificial sense of urgency for you all, but it can be a strategic choice in your classroom. All right, so time is up. Nice. All right, so we're gonna maybe a 1 minute stretch break. This is a good thing to implement at the halfway point of your classes in general. If you give a concrete amount of time for the students to get up and take a break, it really helps. Sometimes the shorter amounts are better, so there's not space to go out and get an iPad and go do other things. So a 1 or 2 minute break is usually sufficient for a 30 to 45 minute class. Of course, if it is a longer class than that, then adjust accordingly. So we'll probably take like a 1 minute break here. If you need to get up, move around, this is my stretch break.
And in the chat, I'm seeing a couple of things. So I have from Nina as 100% beginner, I haven't figured it out. That's totally okay. We were working on kind of getting a project that's a little fun, does some really cool stuff, and is really interesting to do together. I also had a question from Cheryl. After you run the project, how do you reset it? We didn't
That's a
include
perfect extension. That's a perfect extension. If a student asks that question, just be like, well, we're using the pen tool, so maybe the pen category would have a block that would do that. Could you go explore that category and tell me what you find? It's the erase block. It's the erase. Okay.
Can I get a thumbs up in the chat if we feel like we're all ready to move on to our next? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. Fantastic. And a thumbs up in the chat. Wonderful.
Yay. Beautiful. All right, 30 seconds to spare. Want me to get started on this?
Yeah, you do a fantastic job.
All right, so we created 4 learner profiles, student A, B, C, and D. These are definitely not, based on the image of a show, the images from a show.
Transportation and synthesis.
These are convenient. These are convenient images to use. So we created 4 students. They're not based on real students, but they are based on patterns that we have seen in the students that we have worked with. They have varying amounts of information available. Sometimes you have access to the student's files, sometimes you don't. So this is just a arbitrary collection of students that we thought would be interesting to explore accommodations for. So here's our first one, student A.
So student A, who we totally don't know their name, even if we do happen to know it in canon.
Not at all.
You know that they have a diagnosis on file of dyslexia. You've observed that they tend to avoid reading text out loud. They struggle with color coding. They use text-to-speech often. And from some of our warm-up activities, you know that they really love science and video games.
Our second student is student B. We're just going to give you an overview of all of them, and we'll talk about each student individually in just a moment. So for student B, you kind of have the idea that they're undergoing some screening, maybe for autism spectrum and ADHD. You do know for sure that they're frequently chatty with their neighbors. They have very big feelings on the happy side and the maybe not so happy side. They daydream often, and they're really into drawing and comics.
For student C, they don't necessarily have a diagnosis on file, but you've observed that they are moderately disruptive. They are frequently chatting with their neighbors, and that though they do finish their work quickly, that work quality really varies. And they seem very interested in jokes, puzzles, and cartoons.
Yes. And student D, we don't necessarily have a diagnosis for this student either. They're undergoing some screening that's been inconclusive so far, but you do know that English is not spoken at home. And the observations about the student include that they do avoid reading text out loud. They struggle a little bit with that. They seem to complete work within the time given. You know that they've expressed a lot of interest in music and food, but part of the thing about them maybe not having English as a first language is creating a little bit of a communication barrier. So you might not have been able to observe or gather as much information as you would for the other students. So this list is a little shorter for student D.
So friends, we would love to hear from you in the chat. What are some accommodations or modifications that you might recommend for our first student? Their information is still up on the board or screen, as is the kind of completed code, so we have an idea. If this student were a student that you had encountered, what might you do? You can refer back or think back to those quick recommendations we provided, or things that we've done in the past, or things that you've done in the past. But please just drop those comments in chat and I will read them out as we get them.
Yeah, and we can't really do unmute because I just realized we're not on Zoom. So we'll have to just do the chat for now. And also keep in mind that process we described. So we identify the project elements. So you can look at the project that's up here. We have some pen tool. We have a little bit of numbers. I don't know if it really counts as math. You kind of decide on that. We have some loops. Like, what are the elements that are in that project? What are the needs that the student has or may have? Because a lot of times you have to guess based on limited information. And then what match would you provide as far as accommodations or modifications? And just to clarify something very quickly, modifications is modifying the project a little bit, and it's a little bit different from accommodations. But for our purposes, we're just going to lump them all together to keep things moving. Go ahead.
What does it mean by color coding? So you may have noticed that this is a student that is having some challenges with using different colors, or if you're saying that something is in a red folder, they're maybe not having an easy time with connecting that. So I'm seeing code with a friend as one person reads through, their code partner embodies what the code should be doing, like physically moving. I'm seeing text-to-speech feature, highlight feature, high contrast, using a text-to-speech rule tool for the blocks like app writer, parallel programming, visual steps. You can also think about, are there any students from our student profiles that might be a good pair for this student?
Mm-hmm. Let's share a little bit of what we prepared and found work really well for us. Go ahead, Hannah.
So a lot of our suggestions were things like color mode, high contrast, something that we have been demonstrating throughout and which was brought up, making the text larger, recording sound effects. If this is a student that is having some challenge with reading out loud, sometimes making those sound effects on your own would be great. Using placeholder sprites to define limit values is a fantastic idea. Having a code buddy and also really being flexible in what that end product might look like.
Yep. All right. So we're going to move a little bit more quickly through the rest of these students. This is our first one. So we created a sample project that a student with this profile might create. And if you want to scan the QR code or check the link in the chat, you can take a look at this. I'm
gonna stick the link in the chat at the very end once we've gone through all the students with our studio that has links to all of the students, so you can see these different fantastic coding projects.
Yes, yes. And I would like to just turn over to Hannah to describe something that's dyslexia specific regarding loops and duplicate features.
So some big challenges that I have are loops can sometimes be very, very confusing to me. And so one of the things that I've been really successful with is, it may not be the most efficient code, but just repeating values is really, really helpful in getting the same thing done. And I can find a lot of trouble with finding blocks in the side, to the degree that even doing this project, Leilani had to remind me, Hannah, duplicate, just to kind of remind me that like I can repeat and I can copy blocks over without finding them again.
Yes, and again, we're just trying to remove unnecessary barriers so that they can focus on the main challenge. Want to tell us quickly about student B?
So real fast, we're gonna put in some accommodations that you might suggest for student B. What are some things that you have found helpful for students who may be similar to this one or a little different? What are some ideas that you have?
We can probably pause here just long enough to get a couple responses, because I do want to give us plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. What are we seeing in the chat?
I'm seeing use Paint to create a custom background. Perfect. Small tasks. For one, young coders, they can walk to understand a loop. Brain breaks. If you want to sound fancy, you can say unrolling your loops. Breaks give an opportunity for the student to share work with peers, teach them how to create custom animated sprites.
Oh, yeah.
Focus on images the student can draw, time frame and visual commands, group leader.
Yeah.
Let them talk to a neighbor to talk it out. Organize tasks and visual reminders of tasks.
Yes, these do overlap a lot with what we have on the next slide. Is there anything, Hannah, you want to add from our list?
From our list, some things that I think we didn't really see is reminding again of those flexible seating if that's an option for you. Quiet spaces, reminding of that like visual timer, and really, really being creative. I'm seeing also using the block comment feature, which is great, and emotional regulation activities built through the lesson.
Yes, and rewarding the creativity is important because this is a student that could spend the entire class just drawing, and so you might want to say, hey, we'll do the code, and then once that's done, you can off to the races with your art. And that's what I tried to simulate here. So this is a student that might provide their own extensions and be interested in the say block and really creating an immersive experience for the gameplay. I will say that like I included a typo in the block on purpose. This may happen, and you can choose whether having perfect diction or spelling is part of the learning objective, or if you want them to focus on that maybe in the debrief at the end when they do their presentation and less while they're actually coding. But we did make a sample project with a student, which you can check out there. And let's move on quickly to student C.
So student C, remember, is moderately disruptive, but with no diagnosis on file. What are some accommodations or modifications you might suggest for this student? Who might you pair them with in our 4-student profile?
Well, waiting for some of the responses to roll in. This also pertains to student A. Sometimes you'll be the first person who'll notice something that maybe the other adults in the child's life haven't noticed yet. Like student A may have some color blindness issues. And sometimes that stuff does get brought to the attention of their counselors and things through these projects, through the project-based learning. And for student C, we can maybe think maybe they're gifted, maybe they might have the disruption could be, relating to something else that, you might not know about at home. All these things we can think about, but we don't have definitive answers for.
So I'm seeing making a storytelling project in Scratch. I'm seeing rubrics to really help work quality be consistent. I'm seeing challenge them. Absolutely. I'm seeing reinforce quality work. If they finish early and it's not complete, show completed sample so they can see what's finished. Offer lesson extensions. Success criteria. What should this look like? Challenge and level, but involving a joke in their code. And have students see help another student. Make them a leader.
Yes.
Or a teaching assistant.
Yeah, and I think all we really wanted to add is just building off of that, extensions for extra challenges. If you're in a setting where you don't know your students ahead of time, part of your sort of emergency accommodation plan is already having a extension, a very time-consuming extension ready to go for students like this. And also the work quality, the extension is not going to work. The cool thing that they want to show off is not going to work if their original code isn't set up correctly. So it can also prevent the need to kind of check up on them on code as often if they're self-motivated by producing a cool project. And here's the one that I made for this student. This is my favorite one. It's got a very like Hot Wheels kind of aesthetic. I don't know if you'll ever encountered number spammers, but in the code, there's always a student, at least one student that likes to spam really huge numbers. Some blocks, it really, lags the code, and some blocks it doesn't seem to matter. So I tried to include that example here. Letting them just kind of crash their project and start over, I think, is an important part of the process. So here we go with student C. I think we definitely need to move on to student D. And go ahead.
Yeah, real fast. We're going to go through this one again. What are some accommodations or modifications you might recommend for this student? I'm also seeing number spamming starts since kindergarten with ScratchJr, which absolutely does.
It can be delightful. It can be delightful. And
if it crashes, then hey, why do you think that happened?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing let them practice in pairs for this one. Have a reading buddy.
Oh, let's see. I can't see the chat. Let's move over here.
I've never heard the term number spamming, but I'm glad
you're welcome.
that behavior.
You're welcome. Yeah, and it's good to address it before they get to the sort of text-based code. It's good to just address it, let them experiment with it. Math art is a good redirect, giving them a math art project like this where the consequences are not that high and it can make the pen do kind of unpredictable things. It's a good time to do a sandbox number spamming moment.
So with this, I'm seeing incorporating music into lessons for recall and lesson understanding, give them one-on-one time, allow them to use Scratch in their first language.
So glad you said that because that's basically what we said. Hannah, do you want to build on the visually demonstrate results of different blocks, what that means?
Yeah, so when we talk about visually demonstrating the results of different blocks, a lot of that is just, we've had that in the chat again before. It's that idea of if we say a block is moving, maybe we move those steps, or we separate the block and show what that does to the code on its own so that we can build knowledge together. So that's that part of visually representing this. It's modeling for the student. Yes. Thank you, Francisca.
And I'm also going to let Hannah explain this project because there's a really cool feature of it that I think we all should be aware of.
So if you canonically know this student in the show that we're totally not using images from, the student is Jewish, and Hebrew is actually something that in the place that I grew up, there were some learners who spoke Hebrew as their first language. So we wanted to show that Scratch, you can change into a number of different languages. Hebrew we chose, though, because unlike English, read left to right, Hebrew is read right to left. So if you use Hebrew in Scratch, it actually flips the entire screen around. It's pretty cool to look at, but it makes it something that if the objective of the lesson is to think programmatically, does that have to be in English?
Mm-hmm.
And this could become a project that they can share with adults at home who may not speak English and have them understand what's happening.
Yes, and also I think for the student, we said that they did seem to complete their work on time, but the student may also have some cool ideas for extensions and things and customization that they may not get a chance to do because they're so focused on translating. That eats up a lot of brain power, which is good if that's the goal of the lesson. But if it's not, you can free up that space for other things and see what they might produce.
Awesome sauce.
Yay. And I will say a note, this project is, I think the title is saved in Hebrew, right?
It is, yeah.
I don't know if it'll display. You might have to go, you can practice going to the language or like settings language, but do be aware when it flips the screen, that goes to the other side of the screen. So kind of keep track of what it looks like because you might have to find it afterwards. And if you wanted to just take a look at all the projects we presented today, we do have a Scratch Studio set up for it. It has all the student sample projects and the complete and incomplete code. If you want to go check that out. I think Hannah will drop that in the chat.
Just did.
And we want to emphasize process over product. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means, Hannah?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things in Scratch is that a lot of times when you're teaching these programs and you're teaching this programming language, you're really teaching that algorithmic thinking. You're really teaching how do you put this together. The actual product itself is less important than the thinking that goes into putting it together. So it's really important to focus on that process. It may be a hot mess at the end, but if we have learned something and ideally hit the lesson objectives, you're really where you want to be.
Yes, and in this specific episode of the show about transportation, the student failed the entire episode right up until the last minute. And, in a realistic setting, they may not have even gotten it together for that final concert. So it's okay. It's okay if that happens. It's totally fine. And the same thing applies to you as the instructor as well. So your process in figuring out how to provide these accommodations and modifications and remove these obstacles for the student is more important than maybe how it goes that day. It's not going to be as successful some days as others, and that's fine. So it applies to students, also applies to you. Multiple paths to completion. Okay, let's see. Take a look at some of these I think most of the Q&A happened in the chat, so it might already be done. Is there a cost to using Menti? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. I will cycle back to that if we have time in a minute.
There is a free version, though.
There is a free version that allows for up to 2 interactive slides. I pay for it because I do an enormous amount of virtual teaching throughout the year. I will probably investigate, see if my school can pay for it next time. So yes, there is a cost to it. That is a downside. You may find some other alternatives that are honestly similar. This is just the one that I'm used to using. Are there features behind a paywall subscription? Yes. All of it. Back and forth on timers in my classroom. Some kids love them. Some really feel that time pressure and have a hard time with it. They don't have to apply to everybody. I know it depends on your class size, but you could do a timed and kind of an untimed session. I know that my school, because all of my students in my school have learning differences, 100% of them, and so we have to accommodate for every single student and their needs. So we are given like smaller timers that they have at their desk. Personally, if you can find one that just kind of vibrates instead of makes a alarm, that can be more comfortable for the other students in class, and it isn't as alarming. Pun intended. Also, if they have their iPad, there are timers on that you can customize the sound a little bit more. So I think the biggest distraction for me with timers is the sound, and if you can find a way around that, then you can customize. Each student has their own timer, or some of them just some of them you can give them, you have 30 minutes to do this, go, and they can work independently. But obviously, a lot of the students cannot. So,
and we have in chat a couple of things that I think we were going to rat back to around Menti. Pear Deck and Nearpod are really, really similar.
For sure.
We definitely talked about, as we were putting this presentation together, did we want to use Pear Deck? Did we want to use Nearpod? Ultimately, we chose Menti because Leilani's
just know
very familiar with it and had more of the time to put it together. But Nearpod is something that I use almost all of the time, and you can do very, very similar things.
For sure. This is a good question. Working in pairs, sometimes one student does all the work. Any advice on this? Absolutely. So I think paying close attention to how you're defining work is one of the first steps. So if one student is doing all the code, another student could be doing a lot of these sort of front end things like the animation and the character design, voice recordings, a lot of that. And if it's a pair project, sometimes that is okay. I understand if you want them to individually understand the blocks. That might not work, but if you're assessing them on the completion of the group project, giving that student that's not doing as much work a different kind of work to do, it's a challenge, but it can be helpful. Also, clearly defining the roles, like, okay, so student A is going to put together this big code sequence that has to do with whatever function, and student B, we really need your help on animating the dialogue. So they still have to do some code, but it doesn't feel as labor intensive to them because they're already maybe good at those things. So the division of labor can help with that. Hannah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think to that I'd also add thinking about what working in pairs mean. Does it mean that they're collaborating and doing one project, or does it mean that they're each doing a project and are working on it to be able to check each other? Because there are a lot of different ways to be able to work together and still make sure everybody has a product at the end of it.
Yeah, so working in parallel, just like the parallel sequences in Scratch, you could have each student working on a separate level, so that way they're each, what am I trying to say, accountable for their own work, and they all have to do the code and things the same amount. But then you can always remix the projects and combine them at the end. So that's a very good point. The parallel coding does account for some of that. And you can also repair them. I mean, I know it takes more work, but if we get to a certain checkpoints and the other student isn't pulling their weight, then you can say, this, I'm not mad, you're not in trouble, but this is a natural consequence of the effort that you've put in. It's like, we're going to repair you, and the student is going to, be with someone who is also going to match their energy.
Yeah, and just like you might redirect a student who's being disruptive, I know that I oftentimes find myself saying, hey, we can't use this space anymore because we can't have calm bodies in it. You can say, hey, we can't do this anymore because we're not being productive. And by using terms like we and we're going to make a different decision, you are not putting a blame or pointing a finger at one student. You're making it everybody. And so we're making a change to best make everybody work together.
Yeah. All right, we got 2 minutes to spare. So here's our contact information. If you have any more questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today, or just kind of want to see what we're working on in terms of STEM and STEAM education, these QR codes will take us to the LinkedIn. We also have, Instagram / Twitter / anything that starts with an @ usernames here, where we post a lot more sort of visual content. So if you want to yeah, follow up on the conversation. There's a method to do that. So let's check the chat.
There were a lot of questions in the chat about us. We're putting up these slides and putting up this presentation. That's definitely something that we want to do. And we're going to be reaching out to find out where that is possible. Worst comes to worst, we will make sure to find some way to get it on our Scratch site.
Yeah, somehow. We'll figure it out.
We're going to get it to you.
Yes, thank you all.
We can also set the Menti link, I think, to be self-paced. So if you make sure you keep that Menti link, you will have it there too.
Maybe. All right, let me check message. Oh yeah, we might want to turn off the anyone can add projects setting. I will do that in a minute. I just got a message about that.
Oh yeah, we had that one up so that we could collaborate.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Good to know. All right, I don't know what we're supposed to do. Just leave.
We finished exactly on.
Yay! All right, I'm gonna stop my screen share. Thank you all. We're gonna go ahead and leave the session. Let us know if you have any more questions. Bye.
Yeah, thanks, friends.